podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
The Two-Footed Podcast is brought to you by EPLindex.com and our presenting sponsor, Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider. A virtual privacy network allows you to go online, change your location, access things you're geo-blocked from, while keeping your data safe. So, as an example, if you are a UK expat and want access to BBC iPlayer to watch Match of the Day, or ITV Hub, or all four, but you get that message that says this content is not available in your location, a Liberty Shield VPN gets you around that block, allows you to watch whatever you want on those services while also keeping your data safe. And it goes further than that. It allows you to open up Netflix's entire library by just changing your IP address. Liberty Shield is the #1 rated VPN provider on Trustpilot with 5-star ratings across the board. So go to libertyshield.com right now, use the code EPL25 and get either the hardware package or the software package. The hardware package is a router that you plug into your existing router, and any item you want to change the IP address on, be it your phone or your television, you connect that to the new Liberty Shield router. All other items can remain connected to your existing router. There's also a software package which is instantly downloadable to your device and you can get using straight away. Again, libertyshield.com, EPL25 for 25% off at checkout. We're also brought to you by Home of Hopcroft, a giftware and homeware company located in Scotland but shipping worldwide. Check out homeofhopcroft.co.uk and do check out the EPL Index and Anfield Index shops, which you'll find on Etsy. Use the codes EPL10 or RED10 for 10% off at checkout. And lastly, do remember to check out A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. That podcast is on this feed before every Premier League match week. And then the EPL Roundtable, hosted by Kevin DeVries, on its own EPL Roundtable feed. So just search EPL Roundtable in your podcast device. And that's out after every match week. Now, on with the show. What's good, boys and girls? Two-Footed Podcast. Today is Wednesday. It is the 13th of March. I hope you're all well and having yourselves a pleasant day. We had Champions League last night. Arsenal are through to the quarterfinals. A 1-0 win over Porto led to extra time. There was no additional goals scored. And we ended up with penalties. Leandro Trossard, the only goal of the game on 41 minutes from a gorgeous pass by Martin Odegaard that split the Porto defence. Aside from that, Arsenal made awfully hard work of this. I mean, they got into some decent positions and Porto were doing some last-ditch defending, but for Arsenal to play 210 minutes against Porto, the weakest Porto team in the better part of a decade, and only manage 4 shots on target is really disappointing. I thought they lost the midfield battle through the 90 minutes, but in extra time, Porto made changes and took off Gonzalez and Varela, both of whom I think would have taken penalties. So when we got to the shootout, it felt like Porto had weakened themselves. Now, it probably wouldn't have made any difference because Arsenal's penalties were absolutely fantastic. Odegaard, Havertz, Saka and Declan Rice all took great penalties. 3 of them sent the goalkeeper the wrong way, and one of them, the Saka, was hit so hard that he barely managed to move. Pepe and Marco Grujic scored for Porto, but Wendell and Galeno both missed for Porto. It was the 8th successive penalty shootout that Porto had lost. So, obviously not very good in that regard. But again, credit must go to David Raya. He makes a really good save from Wendell then gets a little bit fortunate because he tips the penalty onto the post and it kind of shoots out across the goal and catches the back of his legs and could very easily have gone in. We've seen that happen before, but it managed to squirm out by the post. So he got a little bit fortunate, but he deserved it after a great save. Galeno's penalty was completely telegraphed, and Raya read it really well. Galeno had an absolute stinker of a game. After making a show of William Saliba in the first half, he then just was utterly rotten in the game. But it's a big win for Arsenal. Now, they celebrated it like they'd won the competition. I think someone should let them know there's still as many as 7 games left if they actually want to win it. But look, it's the first time in the quarterfinals in 14 years, which isn't great. Isn't great at all that it's taken them that long. But they're back in the quarterfinals, and we'll see who they get. Based on what we saw over the 2 legs, you wouldn't really fancy them against quite a few teams. You wouldn't fancy them against Bayern. You wouldn't fancy them against PSG. You wouldn't fancy them against Real or City. Barcelona, I think they would beat over 2 legs. You wouldn't fancy them against either Atletico or Inter. Not that they're not better teams, a better team than many of these teams. It's that their manager got completely outcoached across the 2 legs. Sergio Conceição completely outcoached Mikel Arteta. And I think Thomas Tuchel would do the same. I think PSG have more talent than Arsenal. Pep, Carlo, Simeone, or Inzaghi, I think all of them are simply significantly better coaches than Mikel Arteta. Arsenal will be hoping for the winner of Dortmund PSV, but everybody is hoping for the winner of Dortmund PSV in the next round. Barcelona beat Napoli 3-1 to go through. Fermin Lopez made it 1-0. João Cancelo made it 2-0 within 2 minutes after Rafinha hit the post. Amir Rahmani pulled one back on 30 minutes, and Napoli had some chances to equalise and send the games to extra time. But a lovely move involving, I think it was Sergi Roberto, Ilkay Gundogan, and Robert Lewandowski with the finish really just opened them up and made it nice and comfortable. That Barca team last night was interesting to watch. I really like 3/4 of that defence. Koundé, Arejo, and Kubarsi. Cancelo played well. I'm not saying he didn't. But when Alejandro Balde is back, that back 4, I think, is going to be really, really fun and very, very promising for the long term for Barcelona. That's 3 academy kids. Arejo wasn't a kid when he arrived, but he came into their academy. Kubarsi and Balde, and then Koundé is still young as well. So that's a defence that could grow together and develop together for a long time. Midfield last night, you had Fermin Lopez came in. I did say I was surprised he didn't start in midfield at the weekend, but him and Gundogan as the 8s worked really well, and Christensen as the 6, I think, is a good wrinkle that they've thrown in there. We know they have Gavi to come back. We know they have Pedri to come back. They do still need a 6, but long-term, their midfield, as long as Gavi and Pedri get over the injury issues, the midfield looks very promising. And then in attack, you had Lamine Yamal on the right, Lewandowski through the middle, and Rafinha on the left. Obviously, Lamine Yamal is an incredible talent. Rafinha is a really good player. Lewandowski's older, but still capable of scoring. It's a fun team. It is a fun team, and it'll be a fun team when they get their 3-star academy graduates back and add to this. And if they add a 6, and then obviously they'll need to look for a successor to Lewandowski. They may feel they already have that in Vitor Roque. They have Ansu Fati to come back into the mix. Maybe he gets back on track and he becomes the left winger, and it becomes, more of a Barcelona team where a large chunk of it has come through the academy. But the issue with Barca for me is that they don't ever seem to recognize the situation that they're in. Like, from a financial point of view, they're in crazy amounts of debt. And they should be looking to sell off the likes of Rafinha and Frankie and a few others and really turn to that academy and look to develop young players and also then look for high-level young players around Europe that aren't going to cost silly money. So I've mentioned Lamine Yamal for them. I think he could be their six if they wanted. I think you'd get him cheap. You could develop him. He's in the right age bracket with Gavi and Pedri. You develop that trio together. That's maybe 15, maybe 20 million. And that solves a position for you. You know, they did a good value deal for Vitor Roque, and maybe if he works out as the 9, then that solves that issue. He might also play off the left. He's done that before. But it's more of that they need to do and less of the big money free agent signings like Gundogan, like Lewandowski, less of the more experienced big money signings like Rafinha. It needs to be about smart moves to keep themselves competitive to a point for the next 3 to 4 years while clearing that debt and getting the club back on a strong financial footing. And if they do that, then they'll start to earn money again. And then they'll start to build up a war chest. And then they can go and they can splash. Now, again, it's a long-term thing. But I mean, they have the players to keep themselves afloat just from their academy. And then, you know, the one or two you keep like Koundé, like Pedri, who they did buy, and obviously they bought Koundé for a lot more than they bought Pedri for. But he's a very young defender that you can still develop. I was disappointed with Napoli last night. I really was. I thought there was opportunities for them, and I didn't think they took it. We have 2 games tonight in the Champions League. Borussia Dortmund play host to PSV Eindhoven. Now, Dortmund have won back-to-back games in the Bundesliga, beating Union Berlin and Werder Bremen. But both of them were away. Their last home game was the 25th of February, and they lost 3-2 at home to Hoffenheim. That was the game immediately after the first leg against PSV. They currently sit 4th in the Bundesliga. They're 1 point clear of Leipzig, who are challenging them for that final Champions League spot. They're 6 points behind Stuttgart, who are 3rd, 10 behind Bayern Munich, who sit 2nd, and 20 points off top. Leipzig also have a better goal difference. They've conceded the same amount, 31, but Leipzig have scored 5 goals more. So it kind of is advantage Leipzig in the battle for the final spot there with that extra goal difference advantage. Dortmund's undoing has been far too many draws. They've only lost 4 games in the league this year, and only Leverkusen, who haven't been beaten, have lost less. Bayern have lost the same amount. They've drawn 8 times. And if you look at the Bundesliga table, Leverkusen have drawn 4, Bayern 3, Stuttgart only 2, Leipzig 4. Now, Eintracht Frankfurt are the draw specialist with 10 draws. Then Hoffenheim 6, Freiburg 6, Augsburg 8, Werder 6, Heidenheim 7, Gladbach 9, Wolfsburg 7, Union Berlin 4. That brings us all the way down to 14. So there's only a couple of clubs, you know, who aren't in the relegation battle, who've drawn as many or more as Dortmund. And a lot of them are games that they should be winning. You know, you look at the draw away to Wolfsburg, it's a game they should win. They should be beating Heidenheim away from home. They should be beating Mainz at home. Mainz are dreadful. They should be beating Augsburg away. This is just too many draws. Like the Leverkusen draw is fine. You'll accept that. But Eintracht were awful when they drew 3-3 with them. Too many draws has really torpedoed their season and stopped them from being able to challenge at the top of the league. For Eindhoven, they're having a tremendous domestic campaign. 25 games, 22 wins, 3 draws. Scored 80, conceded 13. Now, their scored 80 is 17 more than the next closest team, and they've conceded 6 goals less than the next closest team. They are 10 points clear at the top of the Eredivisie. Since the game against Dortmund, they beat Zwolle 7-1. Then they drew 2-2 with Feyenoord, who are second in the league. Then they beat Go Ahead Eagles at the weekend 1-0 to maintain that advantage at the top of the league. I would fancy Dortmund to have a little bit too much for PSV, especially since the game is in Dortmund. But there are some good players in this PSV team without question. And some players that Dortmund will need to be wary of. Now, Luke de Jong is not anybody's idea of a top-class player, but he is a regular goal scorer for them, and he's consistent in front of goal. They've got Bakayoko, who's a star in the making. Now, I'm not sure if he's going to be fit. I've really liked what I've seen from Malik Thielman this year, the USA international. He was on loan at Rangers last season and had a good year. And this season, I think he's been really, really good in this PSV team. And I wonder if PSV will try and keep him on a permanent deal. I don't know if they got him with an option to buy. Yes, a loan with an option to buy. I would imagine they will take that option up. They will likely sell Johan Bakayoko this summer, and they will likely get a significant fee for him, which should free up the money to bring in Thielman on a permanent deal and then obviously do something else as well. There's some very interesting players in that PSV team. I quite like what I've seen of Marco Jr. Was probably a left back, but they've used him in midfield a fair amount this year. Great to see Chucky Lozano back playing at a good level. He was obviously there before, went to Napoli, and never quite clicked for him at Napoli. But I think he's done well since returning to PSV. His goal scoring might not get back to the numbers he was putting up before the move, when he scored 19 and then 20 in back-to-back seasons. Only 5 this campaign, but I think as an all-round player, he's definitely developed, and I've always been a fan. So that one should be fun. Obviously well-balanced at 1-1. So one to look forward to. In the other tie, it is Atletico Madrid at home to Inter Milan. Now, obviously, Inter won the first leg 1-0 in Milan. Since then, Atleti's form has been mixed, would be polite. They drew 2-2 with Almeria. Almeria are awful. They went ahead twice and conceded twice. So that's not good. Then they played Athletic Club de Bilbao in the Copa del Rey semi-final second leg. They were 1-0 down from the first leg, and they got spanked 3-0. Then they beat Real Betis 2-1, but Betis aren't particularly good this year, and they were 2-0 up, conceded a goal, and very nearly gifted that one away. So that was quite a fortunate win. And the weekend just passed, they played Cadiz, who were in the relegation zone, and they lost 2-0, and they just looked really flat and lacking in energy. And that's not ideal when you're about to take on an Inter Milan team who are absolutely flying. Since the 1-0 win over Atleti, actually just before the 1-0 win over Atleti, they were on this unbelievable run. They started with a 2-1 win over Genoa on the 6th of January. Then on the 13th of January, they went to Monza and beat them 5-1. Then they played the Supercoppa semi-final against Lazio on the 19th of January and won 3-0. On the 22nd, they played the Supercoppa final. They beat Napoli 1-0. Then on the 28th of January, they beat Fiorentina 1-0. Then on the 4th of February, they beat they beat Juve 1-0. On the 10th of February, they beat Roma 4-2 in Rome. Then they played Salernitana at home and beat them 4-0. Then they played Inter at home on the 20th of February and they beat them 1-0. And since then, they've gone to Lecce on the 25th and beat them 4-0. They've played Atalanta at home on the 28th and beat them 4-0. They played Genoa at home on the 4th of March and beat them 1-0. And then this past Saturday, they went to Bologna and won 1-0. They've won every single game this calendar year. That's 13 wins in a row. They're absolutely flying. And Inzaghi has been able to rest players here, there, and everywhere. So he's not having to overplay anybody. Çalhanoğlu needs a rest, no problem. Asllani comes in. Bastoni needs a rest, Augusto comes in. At the weekend, for example, they wanted to give Pavard the rest. So Bissek came in and scored. Dumfries needs a rest, Darmian can start. DeMarco needs a rest, Augusto can come in again. Laturo needs a rest, Alexis Sanchez comes in. Thuram needs a rest, Arnautovic comes in. Mkhitaryan needs a rest, Klaassen comes in. Barella needs a rest, Fratesi comes in. Azerbi needs a rest, De Vrij comes in. Like, they've been able to just give everybody a game off along the way. Now, part of that is good fortune, obviously, because they're not picking up too many injuries. But it's also really good management. Really, really good management. Like, they played Atalanta. Sorry, they played Lecce away. And their normal midfield is Barella, Çalhanoğlu, and Mkhitaryan. He played Fratesi, Asllani, and Mkhitaryan. And they won 4-0. He was able to rest Azerbi and Bastoni in that game too. Now, Bastoni, I think there is a bit of a concern over an injury that he's been carrying, but he did play at the weekend against Bologna and looked absolutely fine. So shouldn't be any issue there for him. But I've just been really impressed. The more when bring it back to Liverpool for a second, when Klopp announced he was leaving, a few people suggested Simone Inzaghi, and I kind of dismissed it because I liked him at Lazio. I really liked just how aggressive he was in the style of football and how exciting it was. And I feel like at Inter, he's kind of reined himself in a bit too far. But when you start looking at it, and like they're 10 games from the end of the season, they're 16 points clear. They've lost once in the Serie A this year. They've already won a cup. Like, it's just very, very impressive the way he's managed the squad, kept everybody active and interested, and kept them all connected to the team. They've lost 2 games all year. They lost in the Coppa Italia. Bologna beat them after extra time in the round of 16, which was their first game. And they will feel aggrieved to have not won that one because Martinez scored in normal time. Then they went 1-up in extra time, and then they just kind of let it slip. They've lost no games in the Champions League in a difficult enough group with Sociedad, Benfica, and Salzburg. They weren't spectacular at all. They just kind of managed their way through the group, came through in second, and they drew at Leti. They've just been really, really impressive. Like, the only league game they've lost this season, Sassuolo beat them on the 27th of September. And again, they'll be annoyed with themselves not winning that one because they went 1-0 up at home and let that one slip. But they've only dropped points in 4 games in the league this year. Sassuolo home, Bologna home was a draw, Juve away was a draw, and Genoa away was a draw. And in the returns of them, they've beaten Bologna, they've beaten Juve, and they've beaten Genoa, and Sassuolo will be getting an ass-kicking on the 5th of May. And this league title's as good as wrapped up. I mean, they play Napoli next, then Empoli. They'll win both of them. They're both at home. Then they go to Udinese. They should win that. They play Cagliari home. They should win that. And then they play Milan. And if they win that, that's it over. It could be over before that. It could well be over before that. But if Milan at least match them in the next 4 games and Milan win their next 4 games, then they'll win the title by beating Milan. And they'll still have 5 games to go. And it'll be wrapped up safe as houses. They're guaranteed to be top for the next 5 weeks, even if they lose each and every game. Like, they could lose the next 4 and lose to Milan and still be top. They've been so dominant. And again, you look at things like, are they scoring enough goals? They've scored 70 goals. They've got by far the best attack in the league this year. Are they defending well? Well, they've only conceded 13 goals this year in the league, which is 10 less than Juventus. And Juventus play a dull style of football. For context, Inter have scored 26 goals more. Like, they're so dominant this season. And again, you look at some of the players that he's doing this with. Stefan de Vrij, good player, past his best. Acerbi, good player, past his best. Benjamin Pavard, good player, not elite level. Bissek, young, promising, we'll see. DeMarco's been tremendous. Darmian plays far too much for my liking, but he plays multiple positions, so that's why. And Bastoni is world class. Bastoni is the only world-class defender that they have. Then the wing-backs. Dumfries is the starter. He's okay. I think Frattesi's outstanding. He doesn't start a whole lot. 3 starts in the league. Now, a lot of sub-appearances, but only 3 starts. He's turned Hakan Çalhanoğlu into an outstanding footballer. He was a good footballer before. He's become an outstanding footballer under Inzaghi. Asllani is one of their future players for the midfield. Again, doesn't start a lot, but comes off the bench a lot. And he's a great rotation player. Mkhitaryan, he flopped with 2 different clubs in England, went to Roma, spent a couple of years at Roma. People thought he was finished. He's joined Inter, and he's been great this year. Barella is the only top-class midfielder there. Now, I think Asllani and Frattesi can both become top-class, but for the moment, it's just him. Carlos Augusto is a guy who he's okay. He's not elite level. He's only in on loan from Monza, but he's been really, really good for them when they've needed him, and he's played quite a bit. And then in the attack, Laturo's incredible. Laturo's world class. Marcus Thuram's good, but he's not great. Arnautovic is meh, and Alexis Sanchez is well past his best, and yet he's getting high level performances from all of them, and he's using the squad really well. And like even Davy Klaassen, who's been fairly much finished for about 5 years, he's performing when he's called upon. But he's chopping and changing when he needs to, resting players when he needs to, and because of it, he's not having to deal with a ton of injuries. Jan Summers played 35 total games this year. De Vrij 28, Acerbi 30, Pavard 23. He's had an injury. Bastoni 29, he had a minor problem. DeMarco 31, Darmian 34, Dumfries 27, Frattesi 31, Çalhanoğlu 31, Asllani 25, Mkhitaryan 37, Barella 37, Augusto 37, Arnautovic 28, Marcus Thuram 36, Laturo 35, and Alexis Sanchez 24. Like, he's not had to deal with huge amounts of injuries, but it's because he's managing the squad so well. They've played 38 games this year, and they've got quite a lot of lads who've played over 30. Quite a few who've played over 35. And yet there's a whole bunch that are just in the 20s, and it's great because they're contributing. So super impressed with everything Inter Milan at the moment. Not so impressed with Atletico Madrid at the moment, and I think it's going to be a tough night for Atleti. Now, we know Simeone is the master of the dark arts. We know he's going to try and shithouse some stuff. My hope is that the winner of this draws Arsenal. Part of me wants it to be Simeone because I just think he would force Arsenal fans to lose their mind. The amount of cry-arsing last night because Porto were playing a physical, aggressive brand of football and they were flat out bullying Arsenal for spells, just physically. And there was some dark arts, some chicanery, some shenanigans. And the crying was incredible. Imagine what they'd be like against Simeone. Imagine what they'd be like. Just fantastic. However, I don't think Atleti can win this competition this year. Inter, I actually think, could win the competition this year. We saw them give City a hell of a time in the final. This is a better Inter team than that. It's just one to consider. Just is one to consider. Which of them would be funnier against Arsenal? I think both outcoach Arteta all day, every day. I think Arsenal could beat Atleti. I don't think they could beat Inter. I really don't. I don't think over two legs they could beat Inter. Now, could be wrong. But feel like Inter are well set up to deal with Arsenal. Right, we'll go to break, but before we do, we'll just remind everybody, Declan Rice shat his pants last night in the game. So that's fun. See you in a sec.
Want more flexibility when you shop? With over 1,000 stores nationwide, you can get what you need now through Instacart. And with Klarna, you can pay now or later. All you do is add items to your cart on the Instacart app, and at checkout, select Pay With. Then select Klarna. Flexible shopping on Instacart. Flexible payments with Klarna. New customers get $15 off your first two orders of $60 or more when you pay with Klarna using code 15Klarna. Terms apply. See Instacart.com or download the app for more details and to start shopping.
Right, welcome back. So, given it is Wednesday, it is Nostalgia Day, and given what took place last night, and given what a generous kind of guy I am, I thought what I'd do today is I'd get nostalgic about Arsenal's European heritage. So, we'll go season by season and see what it is that this once proud club has accomplished in European football. So, they did win the Intercities Fairs Cup in 1970. That's a cup that nobody remembers and nobody cares about. So we'll chuck that one right in the bin. They were in the same competition the following year. They got knocked out in the quarterfinal. But again, it's an irrelevant competition that nobody cares about. 1972, they were in the European Cup, having won the league in 71 as part of a double. They were in the European Cup and they reached the quarterfinal stage of said European Cup. We move on. 1978-79, they're in the UEFA Cup. They get knocked out in the third round of said UEFA Cup. 1980, having won the FA Cup in 79, they're in the Cup Winners' Cup. They get to the final and lose on penalties to Valencia. 1982, they're in the UEFA Cup and they get knocked out in the second round of said UEFA Cup. Should I be going season by season and doing who they beat? Sure, we might as well do that. We'll go back to the start again and just to give a full rundown of their European heritage. So 71-72, their first year in the European Cup, they beat Strom Godsed of Norway 7-1 on aggregate. Then they beat Grasshopper Zurich 5-0 on aggregate. And then they lose 3-1 to Ajax on aggregate. So that's their first run in a European competition. 78-79, they beat Lokomotiv Leipzig, who play in a regional league now by the looks of things. They beat them 7-1 on aggregate. Then they played Hajduk Split, and they beat them 2-2 on aggregate on away goals. Having lost 2-1 away in the first leg, they won 1-0 at home. Then Red Star Belgrade knocked them out 2-1 on aggregate in the third round. 1980, I mentioned they lost that final to Valencia, so that's that one. 1981-82, they're in the UEFA Cup. They beat Panathinaikos 3-0 on aggregate, 2-0 away, 1-0 at home. Then they faced a club called FC Winterschlag, who were now known as Genk, and they went out 2-2 on aggregate. Having lost 1-0 away, 1-2-1 at home, they went out in aggregate. The following season, 82-83, Spartak Moscow beat them 8-4 on aggregate in the first round. They do not compete in Europe again until the 1991-92 season because of the ban for Heysel. So, in the European Cup that year, they played Austria Vienna in the first round, and they won 6-2 on aggregate. And then they played Benfica and lost 4-2 on aggregate, including a 3-1 home defeat in the second leg. They're in the Cup Winners' Cup in the 93-94 season, and finally, they win a European competition. They beat Odense of Denmark 3-2 on aggregate. Then they beat Standard Liège 10-0 on aggregate, including a 7-0 away win. They beat Torino 1-0 on aggregate in the quarterfinals. They beat Paris Saint-Germain 2-1 in the semi-finals, 2-1 on aggregate, 1-1 away, 1-0 at home. Kevin Campbell with the only goal there. And then in the 1994 Cup Winners' Cup final, they beat Parma 1-0 with a goal by Alan Smith. Now, the following year, they are in the same competition as winners, and they would get to the final. Not before losing the European Super Cup final to AC Milan. They lost 2-0 on aggregate. That's back when the European Super Cup would be played mid-season over two legs. They drew 0-0 at home and lost 2-0 away. In the Cup Winners' Cup that year, they beat Ammonia of Cyprus, 6-1 on aggregate. Then they beat Brøndby of Denmark 4-3 on aggregate. They beat Auxerre of France 2-1 on aggregate, 1-1 at home, but went away and won the second leg through an Ian Wright goal. Then they played Sampdoria in the semi-final, and they won 3-2 in the home leg and lost 3-2 in the away leg. So 5-5 on aggregate, away goals even, to penalties we go, and Arsenal win 3-2 in the penalty shootout. On to the final. Arsenal versus Real Saragossa. Esnader puts Saragossa 1-up on 67 minutes. John Hartson equalises on 75 minutes. And then Naeem lobs David Seaman on the volley from the halfway line. And Arsenal lose the European Cup Winners' Cup final. In 96-97, they were in the UEFA Cup. And they lost in the first round to Borussia Mönchengladbach. 6-4 on aggregate. Lost both games 3-2. The following year is 97-98. And they are again in the UEFA Cup. And they again go out in the first round at mighty PAOK of Athens, beating them 2-1 on aggregate, including a 1-1 draw at Highbury. Now, if the success is overwhelming you, I don't blame you. 98-99, their first season in the reformatted Champions League. And in the group stage, they're drawn with Dynamo Kiev, Lens, and Panathinaikos. 1-1 draw with Lens, a 2-1 win at home to Panathinaikos, a 1-1 draw at home to Dynamo Kiev. They lose 3-1 in Kiev. They lose 1-0 at home to Lens, and then they beat Panathinaikos 3-1 away. So they take 8 points, 2 wins, 2 draws, 2 defeats from their 6 games, and they finish third. They finished behind Lens because it was head-to-head. They finished behind Dynamo Kiev because they took more points. So out in the group stage go the Gunners. 99-2000, they're again in the Champions League in a group with Barcelona, Fiorentina, and AIK of Sweden. They draw 0-0 in Florence. They beat AIK 1-1 at home. 3-1 at home. They draw 1-1 in Barcelona. Then they lose 4-2 at home to Barcelona. Then they lose 1-0 at home to at home to Fiorentina, and then they go and they win 3-2 in Sweden. They did play those home games at Wembley both seasons because they didn't view Highbury as big enough to hold these Champions League games. They finished third in the group again. Barcelona top, Fiorentina second, Arsenal third. But by finishing third, they drop into the UEFA Cup. So they get another crack at some European glory. They play Nantes in the third round and win 6-3 on aggregate. Then they played Deportivo La Coruña. They won 6-3 on aggregate. Then they played Werder Bremen and they won 6-2 on aggregate. Then they played Lens in the semi-finals and they got revenge for the previous year by winning 3-1 on aggregate. And that put them in the final of the UEFA Cup against Galatasaray. A 0-0 draw. This game was played in Copenhagen. There were riots before the game between Galatasaray fans and Arsenal fans. The game was absolutely horrific. Georgie Hadji was sent off in extra time. It went to penalties, and Galatasaray won 4-1 on penalties. We move on to the 2000-2001 season. They're in the Champions League. They're in a group with Lazio, Shakhtar Donetsk, and Sparta Prague. They beat Sparta away. They beat Shakhtar and Lazio home. They draw away with Lazio, beat Sparta at home, and then lost away in Donetsk. But they did top the group with 13 points, coming out ahead of Lazio based on the head-to-head, even though Lazio had a better goal difference than them. They went into the second group stage, and they were in with Bayern Munich, Lyon, and Spartak Moscow. They lost in Moscow, drew at home with Bayern, beat Lyon away, drew at home with Lyon, beat Spartak at home, and lost in Munich. But they managed to finish second based on the head-to-head with Lyon, despite having a worse goal difference, second behind Bayern, at which point they drew Valencia in the quarterfinals, and they went out 2-2 on aggregate, but Valencia, having scored at Highbury, managed to beat them 1-0 at the Mestalla, and Valencia went through. Valencia would go on to reach the final that year. In 01-02, they're in the group stage with Panathinaikos, Mallorca, and Schalke. They lost in Mallorca, lost in Panathinaikos, lost in Greece, and lost away to Schalke. But they did win their 3 home games. So they finished second in the group and reached the second group stage. They were put in with Bayer Leverkusen, Deportivo La Coruña, and Juventus. They lost away to La Coruña. They beat Juventus at home. They drew away with Leverkusen. They beat Leverkusen heavily at home, 4-1. And then, within the palm of their hands to top the group, they lost at home to La Coruña and lost away to Juventus and were out third in the group and no drop into the UEFA Cup that year. 02-03, once again, they're in the Champions League. They draw Borussia Dortmund, Auxerre, and PSV Eindhoven. They would top that group with 10 points. They beat Dortmund home, Eindhoven away, and Auxerre away, but lost at home to Auxerre, lost away to Dortmund, and then drew at home with PSV. So not the most inspiring end to that campaign, but they had the work done. Into the second group stage, they're in with Valencia, Ajax, and Roma. They would beat Roma 3-1. Then they drew 4 games in a row, home to Valencia, home to Ajax, away to Ajax, and away to Roma. Lost away to Valencia and finished third in the group and were eliminated. 03-04. Yet another year in the Champions League. They're in a group with Lokomotiv Moscow, Inter Milan, and Dynamo Kiev. They lost at home to Inter, drew away to Lokomotiv, drew away to Dynamo, then beat Dynamo home, hammered Inter 5-1, at the San Siro. An unbelievable performance from Henry that night. And then they beat Lokomotiv Moscow 2-0 to advance as group winners. They drew Celta Vigo. They beat them 5-2 in aggregate. Then they drew Chelsea. And this is Chelsea before Mourinho. And they lost 3-2 in aggregate in the quarterfinals. 04-05, Champions League once again, in a group with PSV, Panathinaikos and Rosenborg. They beat PSV 1-0 at home. They drew away to Rosenborg, away to Panathinaikos, home to Panathinaikos, and away to PSV, but then beat Rosenborg 5-1 in the final game and advanced as group winners, where they drew Bayern Munich and they lost 3-2 on aggregate. 05-06, this is their best ever season in the Champions League. They're in a group with Ajax, Thun of Switzerland, and Sparta Prague. They beat Thun at home, beat Ajax away, beat Sparta away, beat Sparta at home, beat Thun away, and then drew at home with Ajax, went through as group winners, 16 points from 6 games. They drew Real Madrid, they beat them 1-0 away, they drew 0-0 at home, they went through an aggregate. They drew Juventus in the quarterfinals, they beat them 2-0 at home, 0-0 away, they went through 2-0 in aggregate. Then they played Villarreal, they beat them 1-0 at home, a 0-0 draw away, 1-0 in aggregate. Through they go to the final, and they face Barcelona. Jens Lehmann is sent off on 18 minutes. Arsenal go 1-up through Sol Campbell, and then in Arsenal fashion, Eto'o scores on 76, Belletti scores on 81, and the dream is over. Arsenal have lost a European Cup final, and there's no joy to be had. Jens Lehmann's harebrained decision to come charging off his line and bring down the Barcelona player at the edge of his own box cost them massively. In 06-07, they have to qualify to reach the group stage of the Champions League, but they do that beating Dinamo Zagreb 5-1. Then they drew Porto, CSKA Moscow, and Hamburg. They would top that group based on the head-to-head with Porto. They won away in Hamburg. They beat Porto at home. They lost in Moscow, drew at home to Moscow, beat Hamburg at home, and drew away in Porto. In the round of 16, they drew PSV Eindhoven, and they lost 2-1 on aggregate after a 1-1 draw at home. 07-08, they again have to qualify to get into the group stage. They beat Sparta Prague 5-0 on aggregate. In their group, they have Sevilla, Slavia Prague, and Stoja Bucharest. They beat Sevilla 3-0, Stoja 1-0 away, Slavia 7-0 at home. Then they go and draw in Slavia, which was just mental. They lose 3-1 away to Sevilla. They beat Stoja Bucharest 2-1 at home. In the first knockout round, they play AC Milan, and they beat them 2-0 on aggregate. Now, Milan were heavily favoured to beat them that year, and they drew 0-0 at the Emirates, but Arsenal went to the San Siro and won 2-0. Then they played Liverpool 1-1 in the first leg. Adebayor scored for them. Dirk Kuyt equalised almost immediately. They went to Anfield and they lost 4-2. So they lost 5-3 on aggregate and out they went. In the 08-09 season, again they qualify for the Champions League by beating 20 6-0 on aggregate in the qualifying round. They're in with Porto, Dinamo Kiev and Fenerbahce. They finished second that year. A draw away to Dinamo. They hammered Porto 4-0. They beat Fenerbahce 5-2 away. Drew at home with Fenerbahce. Beat Dinamo 1-0 at home, but then lost 2-0 in Porto. Then they drew Roma. They win 1-0 at home. They lose 1-0 away. They win 7-6 on penalties. And they advanced to the quarterfinals. They played Villarreal. They beat them 4-1 on aggregate. And then they drew Manchester United. They lost 1-0 at Old Trafford. They had a great chance in the second leg to come back, get a result. They lose 3-1 at home. United played the last 20 minutes, including stoppage time, with 10 men, but were already 3-0 up. So Arsenal out at the semi-final stage that year. 09-10, again, they have to qualify. They beat Celtic 5-1 on aggregate. They get drawn with Olympiacos, Standard Liège, and AZ Alkmaar. That would be a weak Europa League group. They top the group with 13 points. They beat Standard away. They beat Olympiacos at home, 3-2, 2-0. They draw 0-0 with Alkmaar. 1-1 with Alkmaar in Alkmaar. They beat Alkmaar 4-1 at home. They beat Standard 2-0 at home, and they lose to Olympiacos in Greece, but they still go through top. They draw Porto. They beat them 6-2 in aggregate. They lost 2-1 away, 1-5-0 at home. Then they drew Barcelona 2-2 at the Emirates, 4-1 defeat away to Barcelona. Messi scored all four. If you can find footage of that game, that is one of the truly great Lionel Messi performances. So do try and find that one. Let's get the next platter of meaningless seasons up and running. 10-11. They are in a group with Shakhtar, Braga, and Partizan. They finished second in that group, behind Shakhtar. They beat Braga 6-0 at home, beat Partizan 3-1 away, beat Shakhtar 5-1 at home, and then lost 2-1 in Donetsk. Then they lost 2-0 away to Braga. Two teams they'd hammered, they lost away to them. But then they beat Partizan 3-1 at home. They went through, they drew Barcelona again. They beat them 2-1 at home and then lost 3-1 away. Again, Messi was spectacular. 11-12. They qualify to get in. They beat Udinese 3-1 on aggregate. They're in with Marseille, Olympiacos, and Borussia Dortmund, so this is a tougher group. They draw in Dortmund, beat Olympiacos at home, beat Marseille away, draw at home to Marseille, beat Dortmund at home, and lost 3-1 in Greece. They drew AC Milan. They lost the first leg 4-0 at the San Siro, got absolutely shellacked, but then turned around and beat them 3-0 in the home leg. They were 3-0 up at half-time, and it genuinely felt like they were going to pull off an absolute miracle. Now, it wasn't a great Milan team by any stretch, but still, they were on the brink of what would have been an incredible comeback. 12-13, they're in a group with Schalke, Olympiacos, and Montpellier. They finish second. They lose in Montpellier. They win in Montpellier. They beat Olympiacos at home. They lose at home to Schalke. Then they draw away in Gelsenkirchen. They beat Montpellier at home. They lost again in Greece. Arsenal scared of going to Greece, it would seem. In the round of 16, they lost 3-1 at home to Bayern Munich, and then went and beat Munich 2-0 away and went out on away goals. Just a very Arsenal thing to do. 13-14 season, they beat Fenerbahce 5-0 on aggregate in the playoff round. In the group stage, they get Borussia Dortmund, Napoli, and Marseille. They beat Marseille away, beat Napoli home, lose at home to Dortmund, then beat Dortmund away, beat Marseille at home, and then lose 2-0 in Naples, but they'd already qualified. They draw Bayern Munich again. They lose 2-0 at home. Szczesny gets sent off in the first half, and it just throws everything out the window. They go to Munich, they get a 1-1 draw, but they go out 3-1 on aggregate. The 14-15 season, they again have to qualify for the Champions League by beating Besiktas 1-0 on aggregate. They're in again with Dortmund, Anderlecht, and Galatasaray. They lose in Dortmund 2-0. They beat Galatasaray 4-1 at home. They beat Anderlecht 2-1 away. They draw 3-3 at home to Anderlecht. They win 2-0 at home to Dortmund, and they beat Galatasaray 4-1 in Turkey. They draw Monaco in the round of 16. They lose 3-1 at home, and they win 2-0 away and lose on away goals, going out 3-3 on aggregate, but losing on away goals. We have two more seasons of Champions League heritage to get into. 15-16, they're in with Bayern, Olympiacos, and Dinamo Zagreb. They finished second in the group. Lost in Zagreb, lost at home to Olympiacos, beat Bayern at home, then got slapped in Munich, beat Zagreb at home, and then finally went and won a game in Greece, beating Olympiacos 3-0. They drew Barcelona. They went out 5-1 on aggregate. The final Champions League campaign that Arsenal had before this year was the 16-17 season. They're in with PSG, Ludogorets, and Basel. They draw 1-1 in Paris. They beat Basel at home, beat Ludogorets at home, beat Ludogorets away, draw 2-2 at home to PSG, and beat Basel 4-1 away and manage to top the group. And then they draw Bayern. And they get mortified. 5-1 in Munich, 5-1 at the Emirates. Bayern through 10-2 on aggregate. That, my friends, is an absolute shocker. Following on from that, Arsenal's European heritage took them on journeys in the Europa League competition they could maybe win, perchance. In 17-18, they're in a group with Red Star, Cologne, and Bate Borisov. They topped the group with 13 points, 4 wins, 1 draw. That draw was home to Red Star. The defeat was away to Cologne. They won all the rest. In the knockout phase, they drew Östersund and beat them 4-2 on aggregate. Did lose 2-1 at home. They drew AC Milan. They beat them 5-1 on aggregate in the round of 16. In the quarterfinals, they drew CSKA Moscow and beat them 6-3 on aggregate. And then in the semi-finals, they drew Atletico Madrid, and Diego Simeone did what Diego Simeone does and beat them 2-1 on aggregate. In 18-19, Unai Emery in charge. They draw Sporting, Vorska, Poltava, and Qarabag. They topped the group, winning 5 of 6 games, drawing the other that was at home to Sporting. In the round of 32, they beat Bate Borisov 3-1 on aggregate, having lost the first leg. In the round of 16, they beat Rennes 4-3 on aggregate, having lost the first leg 3-1. Then they play Napoli. They beat them 3-0 on aggregate. Then they play Valencia. They beat them 7-3 on aggregate. And then they get Chelsea in the final. And because it's Arsenal, they lose the final 4-1. Oli Giroud, Pedro, Eden Hazard. Iwobi got one back. Hazard got another. And that was all she wrote. Arsenal out. In 1920, they are in the group stage again of the Europa League with Eintracht Frankfurt, Standard Liège, and Vitória de Guimarães. They beat Eintracht away, beat Standard and Vitória at home, draw in Portugal, lose at home to Eintracht, and then draw away to Standard, but still top the group. They draw Olympiacos. They win 1-0 away, and then they lose 2-1 at home and go out on aggregate. Go out in away goals. 2-2 on aggregate, out on away goals. Fantastic. Then last season, they are once again in the Europa League. They're in a group with PSV Eindhoven, Bodo Glimt, and Grasshopper or FC Zurich. They top the group. They win 5. They lose away to PSV, but they win the rest. Then they draw Sporting. They draw 2-2 in Lisbon. And in the second leg, they lose. Sorry, they draw 1-1. 3-3 in aggregate. Away goals have been scrapped. Otherwise, they would have gone through. But the game goes to penalties, and they lose 5-3 on penalties and go out. And that is Arsenal's European heritage. So just to give you an idea of Arsenal's European heritage, they've won 1 European trophy. That was that Cup Winners' Cup. So let's see, where do we stand? What clubs have won more than them? We're not counting any Intertoto Cup nonsense. So that puts them in with the likes of, Lazio, Galatasaray, Aberdeen. We're not counting the Super Cup either. Benfica have won more European trophies than them. PSV Eindhoven have won more European trophies than them. Borussia Mönchengladbach, IFK Gothenburg, Eintracht Frankfurt. These have all won more European trophies than Arsenal. Nottingham Forest have won more European trophies than Arsenal. Manchester City have won more. Borussia Dortmund have won more. Tottenham Hotspur have won more. Schalke have won. Sorry, Schalke have won the same. One. West Ham have won more. They've won two to Arsenal's one. Hamburg have won the same. No, sorry, Hamburg have won more. They've won two. Parma have won three. Feyenoord have won three. Valencia have won two. Anderlecht have won three. Porto have won four. Manchester United have won five. Atletico Madrid have won four. Sevilla have won seven. Chelsea have won six. Inter Milan have won six. Ajax have won six. We're only counting Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, and Cup Winners' Cup, because they're the main European trophies across the history of the game. Super Cup, we're not counting. We're certainly not counting the Intertoto Cup because it was garbage. And then the last one is the Intercontinental Cup. We're just not going to count that either because, I mean, then you'd be running out of room. Where did I finish? Ajax. So Juventus have won six. Bayern Munich have won eight. Liverpool have won nine. Barcelona have won nine. AC Milan have won nine. And Real Madrid have won 16. So there are the list of all the clubs that have won more than Arsenal. If you want the list cup by cup, in the Europa Conference League, it is Roma and West Ham. They've won that competition. Arsenal have not. Obviously, Arsenal did win the Cup Winners' Cup once. Most clubs only ever won it once, but Dinamo Kiev, Chelsea, AC Milan, and Anderlecht all won it twice, and Barcelona won it four times. In the UEFA Cup, Sevilla won it seven times, Inter Milan three times, Liverpool three times, Juventus three times, Atletico Madrid three times. Borussia Mönchengladbach, Tottenham, Feyenoord, Eintracht Frankfurt, Gothenburg, Real Madrid, Parma, Porto, and Chelsea have all won it twice. Anderlecht, Ajax, Manchester United, PSV Eindhoven, Ipswich Town, Bayer Leverkusen, Napoli, Bayern Munich, Schalke, Galatasaray, Valencia, CSKA Moscow, Zenit St. Petersburg, and Shakhtar Donetsk. Oh, and Villarreal have all won it once. Arsenal have not won it. And then in the European Cup, Red Star Belgrade, PSV Eindhoven, Aston Villa, Feyenoord, Manchester City, Borussia Dortmund, Marseille, Steaua Bucharest, Hamburg, and Celtic have all won it once. Porto, Nottingham Forest, Chelsea, Benfica, and Juventus have all won it twice. Manchester United and Inter Milan won it three times. Ajax won it four times. Barcelona won it five times. Liverpool and Bayern Munich won it six times. AC Milan seven times. And Real Madrid 14 times. And there is the list of all the teams with more European heritage than Arsenal. So there we go. I'll see you after this break. Right, welcome back. So, news. Maurizio Sarri has resigned as Lazio manager after a fifth defeat in 6 games in all competitions. Not really a surprise, to be honest. It just had seemed like he'd run out of steam there. They have not been anywhere near as good this year as they would have hoped. And I don't think he would have survived the summer regardless. I think that could be a really good place for Sergio Conceição to land this summer. Obviously a former Lazio player, Scudetto winner with Lazio. I think he'd revitalize the fan base. I think he'd reinvigorate this team as well. There's talent there, unquestionably. I like Pellegrini, the left back. I like Romagnoli. I still think he's a decent centre-back. I think Hizaj is still a decent right-back. Could maybe use one in the middle, one centre-back, just to reinforce things. But you'd have a decent ball-playing defence. Got some talent in midfield. Luis Alberto's still a very good player. They've got Guendouzi. They signed Daichi Kamada. Hasn't been great. I really like Rovella, who's in on loan from Juve. I wonder, would they get to keep him? I think that's a 2-year loan. So I'd be definitely looking to keep him if possible and build with him and Guendouzi as my midfield. And then in attack, Felipe Anderson's still inconsistent. Pedro's well past his best. Definitely time to say goodbye to him. Ciro Immobile is still good, but he's now 34. Might be time to look to move on. I'd probably be looking to rebuild most of that attack. Their summer signings, I don't feel like have really worked out at all. Now, Isaacson is still young. Castellanos is still young. Cancellieri is still young. So maybe all of them can click and start to show what they're capable of. But I mean, Cancellieri is on loan this year at Empoli and not performing at a high level. Castellanos, again, he just hasn't clicked. 2 goals this year. Just hasn't worked out. Isaacson, 2 goals this year, hasn't worked out. But they're young, they're talented, and maybe in time they can all, click and start to work. We'll see. But there's definitely talent there, without a shadow of a doubt. But the bottom line is they're 9th in the league and they've lost 12 league games this year. And that's just not going to get the job done. Like, 12 league games is from 28 is completely unacceptable. And if we look at the league table, nobody else in the top half has lost more than 9. You've got to go all the way down to Verona in 14th. And from there down, the bottom 7 have all lost 14 or more, but they're the only teams with more defeats than Lazio. Defensively, they haven't been dreadful, only 31 conceded, but they've only scored 33, which is so unusual for a Sarri team. Now, a big part of that is that Immobile just isn't having a good season. I think he's only got 4 league goals. And that's just not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. 6 league goals. He's got 6 league goals. Last season, he only got 12. That was a considerable drop-off from the 27, 20, and 36 he got in the previous years. And he's been great for them. There's no question. They got 6 great years, 5 great years and 1 good year out of Ciro Immobile in his first 6 years there. But he wasn't great last year. He's been pretty poor this year. I think it's probably time to look to move on. I think Sergio Conceição makes a lot of sense for them this summer. Jurgen Klopp, Liverpool manager's decision to leave not changed by Michael Edwards' return. Jurgen Klopp said Michael Edwards' return to Liverpool is top news, but does not affect his own decision to leave. Michael Edwards is returning because Jurgen Klopp is leaving. They don't work together. Simple as that. And I think Jurgen is happy with his decision. I think he'll move on and do whatever he wants to do. I think he'd probably take a year out, maybe manage an international team then after that. But we'll see. Ryan Giggs is back working in football, and he is working as the director of football at Salford City, the club he co-owns with Gary Neville, Phil Neville, Nicky Butt, Paul Scholes, and I think David Beckham still? Or maybe Beckham sold his share because of the Inter Miami thing. It's his first job since stepping down as manager of the Welsh national team. Obviously, he was forced to step down because he was in court dealing with some quite severe charges that were brought against him by his former partner. Salford appointed Carl Robinson as manager, and it hasn't started brilliantly, I think it's fair to say. But, we'll see how it goes. They have recently appointed Alex Bruce as the new assistant manager. He was managing Macclesfield. I think I spoke to Steve Bruce, and the next day he left and went to Salford or something like that. It was around the same time. Yeah. I spoke to Steve Bruce and then he left as manager Macclesfield to take up the assistant manager, first team coach role at Salford. But look, Carl Robinson's a good manager. I think Alex Bruce is, by all accounts, meant to be a very good coach. So we'll see how that goes. I'll be really curious. Beckham doesn't seem to be involved. I thought Beckham was involved. He is involved. There he is there. He must have sold. Because I remember it was the other group first, and then he kind of came along afterwards. But I could have sworn he was still involved. Maybe he's not. It doesn't really matter either way. But yeah, Ryan Giggs is now working as director of football for Salford City. Gossip, and we're done. Arsenal have made Victor Gyökeres their number one target this summer. The former Coventry player has an 85 million release clause in his contract. This is courtesy of spoofer Supremo Steve Kay. He does not have an 85 million release clause. He's a 70 million release clause. And obviously Steve Kay is a spoofer, so it's probably all nonsense. Liverpool have told Luis Diaz he is part of the club's long-term plans and will not be for sale this summer. That's not true because they don't know who the manager's going to be yet. And if it's Alonso or if it's Amorim, there isn't really a spot for Luis Diaz in the team. Arsenal and Liverpool are both interested in Willian Pacho. I think he'd be a great signing for Liverpool, to be honest. Reece Nelson has emerged as a top summer transfer target for Brighton. Seems unlikely. Manchester United want 43 million for Mason Greenwood. An unnamed club from Saudi Arabia has expressed an interest in signing him. That kind of price tag would rule him out of going to Barcelona or Getafe this summer. Manchester United are trying to bring Mikel Moreno back to England. He currently plays for Real Sociedad. I could see him being a decent signing for them. Despite interest from Juventus and AC Milan, it is Aston Villa who are in pole position to sign Mario Hermoso this summer. He's not very good, but he'd be a decent backup to Pau Torres. Chelsea might look to offload several stars this summer, including Raheem Sterling. West Ham are monitoring Pedro Goncalves. He has a £68 million release clause. He's been brilliant for them under Amorim. Nice will demand a fee of $50 million for Jean-Claire Todibo, which makes sense. Man City are in talks to extend Stefan Ortega's current contract, which again makes sense. Everton, Jacob Greaves, Jared Branthwaite, yada yada. Eddie Howe will remain manager of Newcastle even if the Magpies fail to qualify for Europe this season. It's Luke Edwards, so you never know whether it's true or not. Man City and England defender Kyle Walker says he would be interested in a lucrative move to Saudi Arabia. Of course he would, because he's got all those families to care for. Fulham and Nottingham Forest are interested in Bologna attacking midfielder Lewis Ferguson, who's been very good this year. Brighton's Scottish midfielder Mark Leonard is wanted by Preston, Plymouth and Swansea. And there we go. That's me for today, folks. I will see you all tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Social Podcast Network.